I'm Jenny with the Charleston Reiki and Wellbeing Center, and I'm back to talk a little bit more about channeling. So first, I apologize for the first video in this series getting cut off a little bit abruptly. Had some technical difficulties. Hopefully I have that resolved now. And I'd like to talk a little bit further about this telepathic means of channeling, which is basically what channeling is using telepathy. So one of the things that comes up a lot is an issue with names. It's a difficult sort of thing. Now try to think about telepathy as using thoughts. Imagine that you are translating. For those of you who are bilingual, you know what I mean. Those of you who aren't have probably experienced issues with trying to talk to somebody who doesn't speak the same language as you. It can be really challenging. And even those who are bilingual, multilingual, sometimes taking something stated in one language and translating it into another can be a little bit challenging. Now, add an extra layer of that on, because when we're talking with people who are not in physical bodies, they have zero language. They're thinking in pure thoughts the vast majority of the time. They might insert a word here and there, sometimes, not always. I find that sometimes, not always, those who have very recently passed are still thinking in language, and they're just still caught up in that habit, but that's not always the case. Remember that there is no time in the spirit realm. I actually have a friend who channels who has a non-physical friend, and her non-physical friend likes to use the term timeless, spaceless place, which I love that phrase. I think that sums it up absolutely perfectly. But it's true. It's not even really a place since it's spaceless, but there's also no time there. So even if it's only been 3 days in our timeline, they're not experiencing time. For all they know, it could have been 3 years. They don't have a good sense of that usually. And I find that many times when I contact someone who it's been maybe 3 weeks since they passed away by our timeline, they might say, if I bring that up, they might say, oh, well, I thought it had been years. It seems like so much longer. Or if it has been 3 years and I bring that up, they might say, oh, I thought it was just days or weeks or whatever. They don't have a good sense of our time because they're not living it. They're totally outside of time, totally separate. And I know that's a really hard concept to wrap your head around. So now imagine that you have essentially forgotten language because it's a totally separate reality. It feels like it's been ages since you've used that language, and you've pretty much forgotten it. And I have had them sometimes tell me, I don't remember that, because sometimes I'll ask them if I don't understand something, can you try to tell me the word for that? And sometimes they can, and sometimes they'll say, oh, I don't really remember words very well. And I had a client I worked with recently who it had been, I want to say about 6 months since he had passed on, and he didn't remember any language at all. He thought it had been ages. He didn't remember he remembered the vague idea of using it, but he didn't remember the language itself. And so I also sometimes will run across someone who, say may have had a grandparent from another country who, never learned English, or maybe they never even lived here in the U.S., and they might say, oh, well, can you channel that person because she only ever spoke Italian? Well, yeah, because they're talking to me in thoughts, not in words, so the language really isn't important. But here's where it gets dicey. There are certain things that are very difficult to convey in thoughts. And here's an example. The most common thing that comes up are with names. Names are the most difficult thing to get when a being is communicating with us without words, because a name is a word. That's the only reason a name can be used, is within a language. So if you're trying to communicate a thought and you're thinking about that person, it's really difficult to convey to someone who probably didn't know that person who that person is if you don't remember words. So, and it doesn't mean they don't care, and it doesn't mean they don't love you just because they don't remember your name. And I'll use an example here. So throw out a really super common name, Mike. Let's say I'm talking to someone who is no longer physical, has left their body, however long ago it might have been, and they want me to give a message to Mike. Well, okay, they're trying to communicate that to me. But if I'm not getting the energy, the thought behind who that person is, I'm not going to know that it's Mike, because if they're not using the name and using words, and I almost feel like, when you're talking to a baby, if any of you have young children or have been around young children, and they start talking and use your words, but really they don't remember them. It's not their fault. They use telepathy. They think in thoughts. That words are not required once you leave the body. We use them here in the physical because we've forgotten how to use telepathy for the most part, but that's a whole separate topic. Anyway, so this example of this name Mike, and I just picked an arbitrary name, by the way, because it's a common one. So, they're trying to give me thoughts of the energy of this person. But if I don't know that person, how am I going to understand that? Now, okay, because I picked that arbitrary name, I did, when I was a teenager in high school, I had a boyfriend for a while whose name was Mike. If that being happens to stumble across that thought, like let's say I happened, which I don't think about him often, but it's been many years, but let's say that for whatever reason I had been thinking about him and they were able to pick up on that thought that I'm having, then if they remember something about the name, or they're able to recognize the commonality behind the names, they might be able to show me something about him, and I'm like, oh, Mike, as in the Mike that I used to know? And they would say, no. Oh, okay, you mean a different Mike. Yes, okay. Um, but again, if they don't remember the name, they can't even go that deep. So they might be sending me an energy that to me might feel like friend, male friend, except that to them, that same energy might be brother. Now, I don't have a brother. I didn't grow up with a brother. I don't know what that energy feels like. And even if I did have a brother, my brother energy feeling might be different from somebody else's, because we all have different experiences. So this thing with names, it is not an exact science. And unless they remember language, they're going to struggle trying to get that thought across to us. And it's really common for people who do this type of work to really come up with names. And that's why you'll often see, for example, a lot of the mediums that appear on TV and whatever, they might say, oh, I'm getting something maybe with an M. Oh, wait, maybe it's an N. Oh, wait, is it this? And people will say, oh, it's a hoax. Well, not necessarily. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that are not genuinely channeling and they're not genuinely mediums. I'm not saying there's nobody who's fraudulent out there, because I'm sure there is. And I hate to see that portrayed in this industry, because there are many of us like myself who just want to help people, and that's it. But just because you can't come up with a name doesn't mean that you're not genuinely doing what you say you're doing. It's because a name is such a difficult energy to grasp, because the energy behind a name is what's associated with it. Now, when I think of the name Mike, because I had a positive experience with that high school boyfriend, and I cared about him very much, I think of him fondly. I hear that name, and I think, oh, happy thoughts, Mike, oh yeah, I remember that, that was nice. Whereas somebody else who might have had a horrific experience with someone named Mike would have a very different energy around that name. So it's the energy that comes through, not the name itself. And that's why it's so difficult to decipher. Now, sometimes they might be trying to struggle to come up with the name, to try to remember the language, to try to convey in words, and bits and pieces might come through, and that's where some people are like, I think it might be an M, but I'm not sure. That's what that's about. So yes, there are some frauds out there. I'm sorry that they exist, and it's really a shame that people do that. However, just because a lot of us can't come up with names a good bit of the time, It doesn't mean we're not genuinely talking to the person. It just means that some of those things are really difficult to convey in thoughts, because that is how this works most of the time. Anyway, I'm going to wrap that up for right now. Again, I am Jenny with the Charleston Reiki and Wellbeing Center. I'd really appreciate it if you'd like my video, if you did enjoy this, and click on the subscribe button. I'm going to post some links. If you click on the little arrow down right at the bottom of this video on your YouTube page, you'll notice I've got a couple links on there and some more information for you. You can find a link to the channeling page on my website. You can also find a link to the first video in this series in case you haven't seen that one yet. And I'll come back with more because people are always asking me questions about channeling and how this all works, and there is so much more to discuss. So, on that note, again, Charleston Reiki and Wellbeing Center, the website is charlestonreikihealing.com, and that is CHARLESTON, Reiki, REIKI, healing, HEALING.com. Thank you so much, and I hope this has been helpful for you. Namaste.